What is up, everybody? I am Hoops and Hip Hop, and welcome back to another episode of the Pokeblock Podcast. In last week's episode, we talked about the whole Pokemon Unite fiasco and the fallout from that supposedly really hyped announcement that ended up not being so hype after all, and it was kind of a disappointment. But anyway, now that that's kind of over and done with, there isn't really like any huge brand new Pokemon news to discuss because we've all had it the past couple of weeks, which is super understandable. And so today we're gonna do one of my, I guess, just random topics that I generate that I like to talk about that I have really wanted to actually talk about for a while now. It's been sort of on my mind. I've very lightly played with the idea of making a video about it, but I feel like it would be better as a podcast topic. So that's what we're going to do today, and it's going to be all about basically how amazing and perfect Sword and Shield are for a prequel game, where we get another game that is set in the past of like the Galar region, and we play out in like a previous time, like a previous time frame, a previous era of the Galar region. Like, the game is super well set up for that, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do get into the main topic, I also want to talk about today's episode of Pokemon Twilight Wings that just dropped. It actually, well, it wasn't technically today, it was 11 p.m. my time the day before this podcast is going up. I don't know why they posted it that late at night, but they did, and so because it just barely dropped, I'm going to talk about it for a minute, give my brief thoughts, impressions, that kind of thing, and then we'll get into the main topic. Before we do all of that, though, I've got to thank the people who literally allow me to talk about this stuff in the first place and make it possible, and that would be our lovely sponsors. So without further ado, today's episode is brought to you by the Tax Defense Group. Due to the global pandemic, the deadline to file your taxes for 2019 was pushed back to July 15th, 2020. If you haven't filed your taxes for 2019 yet, there's good news. The Tax Defense Group can e-file your taxes for you. The process is quick, and for millions of people, you will get money back. So what are you waiting for? Call the Tax Defense Group today at 800-850-7973 to get started. That number again is 800-850-7973, and you can visit them online at thetaxdefensegroup.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Writer Junkie. Are you thinking about starting a business or a side hustle? For all businesses to be successful, you need a website. Writer Junkie offers website development, content writing, and SEO services for business websites. Call Writer Junkie today at 805-587-7966, and you can visit them online at writerjunkie.com. So, today's episode of Pokemon Twilight Wings is the 6th episode of that little mini-series. We only have one more episode after this. It's pretty crazy and kind of sad because I love me some good Pokemon animated material. Like, I love having a good like Pokemon show that I can look forward to. I do need to check out Pokemon Journeys on Netflix. Still haven't done that yet. I hear it's pretty good, but we've been over this discussion before. Pokemon Twilight Wings is where it's at for me, and it just saddens me every time I watch one of these episodes that it's only 5 to 10 minutes long. This one was actually 7 minutes, and I think that's like the longest one we've ever had, but 7 minutes is still insanely short, and it just saddens me that we don't have a full series like this, so more than 7 episodes, and episodes that are like 20 minutes long. It just is a bummer. But I do appreciate what we have regardless, and in this particular episode, it was a really good one because it started to tie back to, I guess, the main plot, you could say, of this series. The series has kind of just been, the focus is highlighting different characters of the Galar region and the Pokemon Sword and Shield games, so it's kind of been a little all over the place where every episode focuses on a different character. But in this particular episode, we got a little bit of a we have come full circle, so to speak, almost, where we got some more tie-in to what happened in the first episode, because if you remember, and if you've been following Pokemon Twilight Wings, in the first episode, it focused on a kid named John, I believe, and his friend Tommy, and basically John is a super huge fan of Leon, but he's sick, he's in the hospital, and his dream is basically to go to one of Leon's matches, and so he wrote Chairman Rose, because he heard Chairman Rose was going to be making a visit to the hospital, to ask him if he could get an invite to make this happen. And then that episode, that plot line kind of just ended, and then we started to not really focus on that anymore for the next episodes. Like I said, went to other episodes, went to other characters that focused on their own stories, but in this episode it kind of tied back into that previous plot line, where Tommy, John's friend, who's the one who is sick and is trying to get the invite to Leon's match, enlisted the help of Alistair, because apparently Tommy and John, they got into a fight, and Tommy felt bad about it, so he wanted to try and do what he could to help John's dream come true. And so he enlisted the help of Alistair, and it really started to develop that whole plot line further. And it seems like in the 7th episode, that is what's going to happen. It's going to come full circle, because the ending of the episode, as with all of the other endings of all of the episodes where they kind of hint at what's going to come next, featured Leon, and Leon finally got the letter from that kid. Chairman Rose gave it to him, so it seems like that whole thing is going to come to a climax. It's going to come full circle in the next episode, which is the final episode, and I gotta tell you, I just really love that. That is just the cherry on top to this series, because the series, just in its tone, in its presentation, it's just been perfect. It's just, the animation is beautiful. It has that more mature tone to it without being, like, once again, inappropriate for kids. So it's still appropriate for all ages, but it's something that like an older person can enjoy. And just every single episode, even though they've been short, has just been awesome. So the real cherry on top is that they're like not forgetting about that initial episode, and they're going to kind of wrap up loose ends and tie it all together for the series finale. And I think that's amazing. I I'm super excited for it, obviously, but I'm really hoping that we get more stuff like this in the future, and crossing my fingers, maybe eventually one day they will do something like this, or like Origins, or like Pokemon Generations, in like as an actual full series. That is the hope, that is the dream, and I will keep dreaming for it till the day I die, because I mean, it just, I literally did a whole podcast on this topic when the first episode of Twilight Wings came out, I believe, and it was one of the more like viewed podcast episodes, just because it is a passionate topic for me. And so, yep, that's going to be something I continue to hope for, but I am loving Twilight Wings, and I am looking forward, but also kind of I'm sad at the same time for the finale next month. So that's where that is. If you haven't seen that yet, definitely go watch it, because it is well worth your time, and it's literally only 7 minutes. So if you have like a 15-minute break at work, you could literally watch that and eat your lunch or something. So go watch it. It's amazing. Now, on to the topic at hand. The main topic, as I said earlier, of this podcast is going to just talk about how much I really, really want, even though I know it's never going to happen. So this is just a pipe dream type of episode. A Sword and Shield based game, a Galar game that is a prequel to the main Sword and Shield game that we have. So basically, I want a prequel to Sword and Shield. That's what I want. And the reason why I want that, I'm not just like I'm not just grasping at straws here, just thinking of a random idea. The reason why I've been thinking about this and have wanted to talk about it, and the reason why I think it would be so cool, is because the Galar region and all the stuff that's happening in the Sword and Shield games just seems to just be perfectly set up for a game that takes place prior to the events of this main one, because they talk so much about events that happened in the past, and not like the distant past like we've had in previous Pokemon games. Like, it talks about just like 50 years ago, 20 years ago, that type of thing, to the point where you could have a game set there. And it does it so much more than I can recall for any other Pokemon game or generation. And I just think, like, it's almost like it's peculiar, because we've never really seen Pokemon games like reference the past that much. So with it being such a unique situation, and it doing so much of this setup, it just almost, like, it would be like a crying shame, even though I know this is never gonna happen. Like, this is just like so not likely that it's like crazy in terms of actually being a thing. So this is just like I said, a pipe dream episode where we're going to talk about how great this would be and just talk about sort of, I guess, my hopes and my dreams. Even though this, as we're going to get into, it might just be a crazy dream, but it's something that makes a lot of sense and is just like there for the taking at the same time, which is why I wanted to talk about it so much. So yeah, Sword and Shield, the Galar-based games, the Galar region, everything that happens in these titles, so much of it it's really interesting actually, because there's a lot that's set up in terms of like looking forward, looking ahead in terms of like a possible sequel game. That was also another podcast episode I did. Check it out if you haven't yet. So this is going to be a really like nice counter argument, not an argument, but like this is going to be a counterpart episode to that, I guess. But in that episode, I talked about how there was so much that like looked forward in terms of the timeline for Sword and Shield, to the point where you could absolutely have a sequel game. There was material there. You had Sonia graduating and becoming the main professor for the Galar region, taking over from her grandmother. You had Hop, who was also going to become a professor. You had you had basically like Team Yell and Macrocosmos and their development, where Macrocosmos sort of like became the evil team and then they like fell out of it. So you have like basically all of Rose's business ventures that are now obviously not tied to him anymore, so that has further development options. There's just so many different things there in Sword and Shield that provide the opportunity to be explored more in a sequel. I went way more in detail in it in that previous podcast episode, but there's a lot of material. So the fact that there's also material now for like a prequel game is kind of crazy. Like this, like realistically, you could make a sequel for any game out there, and you could do the same for a prequel too. You don't really need anything special to be able to do that. You just really need whatever you're working with to be popular enough to warrant a sequel and or prequel, and then obviously writers can just kind of like write around what they've already established for that main thing. The reason, once again, why it's such an interesting, more so than usual, point of discussion for Sword and Shield is because the material is already there. Like, it's not like it needs to be written, because it's sort of already written in the game itself, almost as if that's the direction it's going. But it's like, we know it's not, because just with the context of the franchise and kind of what we know is going on, it's very unlikely that that's going to happen, especially because we have the expansions that are taking the place of like a third game. So that more or less takes our chances of like a Black and White 2 situation. But the fact that it's like in the game already set up for it is what makes this so intriguing and just worth talking about. So yeah, check out that previous episode about the idea of a sequel game if you haven't yet. But as far as a prequel game, there is basically just as much material there that sort of warrants it. It starts with things like, I mean, you do have the far, far back events that happened, like, I believe it was 20,000 years ago, Eternatus landed in the Galar region. I believe it was about 3,000 years ago that the Darkest Day happened, that magical number of 3,000 years. That stuff is just like, that definitely can be considered background, just world building information that obviously we're not going to go play a game 3,000 years ago, even though that's stated. That's not going to happen. That's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about are things like Opal. Opal is a very old gym leader. It states on her league card that she's been a gym leader for 70 years, back before Dynamaxing was even a thing. So, and then in her concept art, this does not appear in the actual game for an unfortunate unknown reason, but her league card, or not her league card, but her concept art shows a young version of her. So a young version of her was conceptualized. We know she has history dating back at least 70 years in terms of being a gym leader. Like, there is so much material there to work with in terms of like a 70-year history. And then you also have different things, like there was a ton that was added into the Isle of Armor expansion with Mustard. We got to see Mustard, what he looked like about 50 years ago when he was actually facing off against Opal, according to his league card. We got to see what he looked like when he was younger. We also got to hear about a previous chairman prior to Chairman Rose that seemed to be just as shady. And we just got to hear a little bit of his background. And there's all of these different types of things that kind of just like it paints a much more clear picture of what the Galar region was like 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago than we know for any other Pokemon region. We also know that like prior to Chairman Rose, there was no Dynamaxing or like Gigantamaxing in the Pokemon League. Like they didn't do that, so it was more of a standard gym challenge as opposed to the one you get in the main game. There's also mention of like a cycling sort of gym system where every year you have to apply to be a part of the major league, and the gyms kind of sort of rotate every year to where you have some gyms that make it one year, but then other gyms make it the next year. That is also talked about in the Isle of Armor. You get in Avery's league card, you get to find out that basically he's trying to become the psychic gym leader because everyone in his family has been a psychic gym leader at one point, and so that implies that there's been a psychic gym leader in Galar as one of the main like Major League 8 gyms. And so you've got that whole system that like just implies that there has been a history there with other gyms being present and whatnot. And then there's just all of this stuff. Like it really is hard to kind of keep track of just because there's so much of it. One more thing I wanted to mention. This was the last thing I wanted to mention. There really is a lot that I'm sure there's stuff I'm forgetting, but the one thing that I specifically did want to talk about that I made sure to remember was basically the history behind Spikemouth. Spikemouth is sort of a rundown town in the Sword and Shield games, but it's run down because there isn't a power spot at that town. And because there isn't a power spot in that town, the gym there isn't able to have a Dynamax like arena thing, and Piers did not want to move the town or move the gym to another area. He wanted to have it in the town regardless. Once Chairman Rose started implementing this into the league, he wanted to get Piers to move the gym, but he didn't want to move the gym, and so basically because the Spikemouth gym is the one gym that doesn't have Dynamaxing in it, it sort of became this rundown, just ghost town, so to speak, because no one comes to that town to see the sights and for the tourism and to watch the gym battles, because obviously all those other ones that have Dynamaxing are more of a spectacle. So you could even explore something like that to where even an entire town has a history to where we could see it in a more sort of healthy state 20 or so years ago when Dynamaxing wasn't a part of the league at all. So you'd obviously have people traveling to that location because there was no reason to overlook it. There's just there's just so many things like that that just are begging to be explored. They're begging to be presented in a prequel type game, and people have been wanting a prequel type game for a while. Like the most popular suggestion in terms of this idea was referred to informally as Pokemon Gen 0. I think there was even sort of a fan game that was made around this idea maybe, but basically that idea explores like you play as either Professor Oak or Agatha, and you play in the Kanto region before like Pokeballs were invented, because there's some background that's kind of mentioned in the Kanto-based games about that sort of thing, and Oak going on a journey and things like that. So there's material there, and it just sparked this idea, and that's kind of one of the more popular prequel ideas that's ever been told. But to this day, we have not had an actually official prequel game. We've only ever had one. I mean, we've technically had 2 sequel games. Gold and Silver are sequels to Kanto. They're not like direct sequels, they're sort of like pseudo sequels, but they are sequels. And then you obviously have Black and White too. So we've only ever had 2 sequels basically. We've never had a prequel game, but my goodness, how cool would it be to get a prequel game? You'd obviously play, I mean, you basically would play as like some non-specific protagonist just from that time era, but imagine getting to see a young Professor Magnolia. You would get to explore that and see, basically, she would still be researching Dynamaxing probably, but it wouldn't be a part of the series or the league at that time. You'd have essentially a whole new crop of gym leaders. The only ones that, or the only one I should say that would be there would be Opal, because we know Opal's been a gym leader forever. But all of the other ones, even if some of the types were the same, would be different characters, so you would have that to look forward to, and you would sort of have, we would get to see the league system in action where some of the types that are represented now would be replaced by different types. Like Kabu, we know he's from the Hoenn region, so his fire type 20 years ago, his gym probably wouldn't be there because he wouldn't have traveled to Galar at that point. So it's very possible that a gym like that could be replaced by like a psychic gym, maybe one of Avery's relatives or something like that. There's just so much to explore there, it's not even funny. And then you could get more background on Mustard as well, not only get to see him in his young form, but also figure out what exactly his partner Pokemon was and the story behind it, because another detail of his league card mentions that he was absolutely undefeated and undefeatable as a champion, and this was about 50 years ago, and it lasted, he was champion for 18 years, so it lasted all the way up until 32 years prior to Sword and Shield starting, where he was basically undefeated. So that's probably the time frame we would play, and therefore we'd get to see him as a champion. But then something happened to his starter Pokemon, it presumably died, and that's where the losses started to rack up. But it's very, like, in the game itself, it's very, it doesn't give a lot of details, it just gives that general vague just explanation of that's what happened, that's Mustard's background. So, like, that could even be explored to where we find out who his partner Pokemon is and find out exactly what happened to it. And then we could also find out who that mysterious previous league chairman is and what he was trying to do and what his plans were. Like, it would just be really cool. I really like the idea in general of a prequel type game, because exploring kind of like how things came to be in any game, like you play a game, you love it, you enjoy it, you grow to become attached to the characters and stuff, and so being able to see how just all of that came to be in any situation is really cool. And just with all of this stuff sort of lining up together for Sword and Shield and already sort of being established, they don't even really have to like there's already so much material that can work in a prequel game that can be explained that gives it a lot of value. Once again, like it's not a case of, oh, they would have to write a bunch of stuff and make it all fit together, and like they wouldn't have to build it from scratch. Like there's already stuff there to make it work, which is why I think the idea is so cool. I really hope that this happens for some Pokemon game eventually. It would be really cool. It would also kind of explain, I guess, maybe the timeline of Sword and Shield itself and sort of the Pokemon world, because there's an interesting conundrum when it comes to Sword and Shield and where it sits in the Pokemon timeline. Because the lack of Mega Evolution in the game suggests that it's not in the Mega timeline. I think that's pretty much set in stone. There's no Megas in the game, so it's in the non-Mega timeline, which I'm totally fine with. And I think the fact that they're, like, obviously people want Megas, that's a thing that people want, just as a feature, but I think the fact that they have a legitimate, like, lore-based reason as to why games cannot have Mega Evolution because they're in the non-Mega timeline, I think that's cool. I think, like, since we've established this dual timeline system with the Pokemon franchise, where you have one timeline that has megas, one timeline that doesn't have megas. I think leaving the non-mega timeline high and dry and never making another game in that timeline again, that would be kind of stupid, not gonna lie. So I think it's cool that they're sort of contributing to that side of things and still supporting the non-mega timeline and showing us how the sequence of events in that timeline plays out. But aside from that, when it comes to the Sword and Shield, just like era of time that it's in, it does create some interesting questions because, like I said, we know from Opal's League card that she's been gym leader for 70 years. Therefore, the gym system as a whole, with Pokemon battles and Pokemon being in Pokeballs, has also been intact for at least 70 years in the Galar region. But that doesn't necessarily line up with what we know about previously in terms of how long like Pokeballs have been around and the gym system and all that stuff, because we know, just based on previous material that's been stated about Professor Oak, especially in the anime, which I know the anime, the games are not the same thing, but I'm pretty sure more or less this has been mentioned in the games, because I think it has to do with Kurt as well. We know that Kurt from the Johto region basically has lived in a time where the modern Pokeball didn't exist. I believe he briefly mentioned something about that. And he's roughly the same age as Professor Oak, which is like, I mean, Professor Oak is about 50-ish, Kurt seems to be maybe 60-ish, so, like, we know there was a time when these characters didn't have access to the modern Pokeball, and they're only 60 years old. So, like, they are, like, so Opal has been gym leader for 70 years, and these characters are like 50 to 60 years old. So Opal's been a gym leader longer than these characters have been alive. And these characters remember a time when there wasn't Pokeballs, or at least the modern Pokeball. So you could say that the Pokeball really has only been around for probably like 40-ish years in the Pokemon world. Roughly around that, probably 40 to 50 years. So for Galar to have a gym system that's already set up, good to go, obviously you'd have Pokeballs. I mean, I guess you could argue that maybe they battled without Pokeballs, but either way, the fact that they have a whole league set up implies that the idea of Pokemon battling has already been established to the point where they can build a league around it. And I think Pokemon battling is also intrinsically tied to the Pokeballs themselves, because Pokeballs are intrinsically tied to Pokemon ownership, and it kind of just is a sequence of events. So we can reasonably assume that the Pokeball was around as long as this gym system was around. And with it being around for 70 years in the Galar region, but us knowing that it's really only been around for about 50 or so years, according to other information from other regions, what does that say about the Galar region? Does it just take place farther in the future? Or did Galar have some sort of special system in place that the other regions didn't know about, to where they had access to Pokeballs like previously? or did they use some modern, or not modern, but did they use some pre-modern, the word is escaping me, just like a basic form of a Pokeball? Did they use a basic non-modern version of the Pokeball for those first few years while they were still having their league matches? There's like so many different questions to be answered here, and it's really hard to say where it, obviously the easiest answer to this question would be that it just takes place farther in the future, but we can't really confirm or deny that, because there aren't really a whole lot of other characters from other Pokemon games in Sword and Shield that really show, okay, time has passed, time has not passed because this character is older or younger or the same age or whatever. We don't really have that in Sword and Shield, so it's really hard to say. But the main idea here that I just kind of want to establish with this podcast is that there's material here to work with. There are ideas that deserve to be explored a little more. We don't have to get like every single answer ever. We can still have some things that are left unsaid and mysteries to be solved, that type of thing. But there are certainly some things in Sword and Shield that warrant the exploring of its recent history, and I would love if they did that in an actual game. I know it's not going to happen. It's just a pipe dream, like I said, but I would love it, and there's just... the idea of it is fascinating, which is why I wanted to talk about it in this podcast episode. But with that said, we basically are out of time for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this little discussion about the idea of a prequel game for Sword and Shield and a prequel game in general. If you enjoyed today's episode, leave a like wherever you're listening. If you're on YouTube, leave a comment as well, letting me know what you think of this idea and where else, like what other games would you like to see a prequel game to? Obviously, it could work for pretty much any generation if you wanted it to. So just let me know your thoughts and ideas about this. And once again, subscribe and follow wherever you're listening. I hope you guys all have a great weekend. It is the 4th of July weekend here in America, so I hope you guys have a great 4th, a great weekend in general, and I will see you guys next Friday with another podcast episode. And if you're not following me on my own channel, Hoops and Hip Hop, be sure to do that. Talk about Pokemon a ton there as well. So with that being said, I will see you guys next week. Have a great week, have a great weekend, and until then, as always, I love you guys, and I will smell you guys later.